To my left. Push.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear? Yep, got it now. Good afternoon, everyone. Dennis Jones from Peterborough City Council.
As Richard from Peterborough here, speaking for Simon Markham.
Afternoon, Lee, CFO and Director of Resources for the Chief Constable. Afternoon, Nick, Bean, the Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire.
Good afternoon, Dal Weston, Police and Crime Commissioner for Cambridgeshire and Peter.
Good afternoon, Jim Haylett, Chief Executive for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Hello, Phil Trussell, Chief Finance Officer, Police and Crime Commissioner.
Good afternoon, John Going, Councillor, County Councillor, March South and Rural.
Hello, everyone. I'm Councillor Anna Bradnam, and I'm the County Council nomination, and my division is Waterbeach Division. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Helen Leeming. I'm here representing South Cambs District Council, and I'm from Camborne.
Thank you much. And joining us via Teams we have
Rachel Edwards, Head of Constitutional Services for Peterborough.
Thank you, Rachel.
Brian Tyler, Peterborough Councillor for Gunthorpe, Warrington and Manor Drive.
Colin Sweeney, Interim Senior Democratic Services Officer at Peterborough.
Elaine Lewis, Senior Lawyer at Peterborough City Council. I'm standing in for the Interim Director of Law and Governance.
Thank you very much. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Colin, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Butel, Ferguson and Woolwork. Councillor Varkey may be a little late as he went to Peterborough for the meeting, is now heading to Huntingdon.
Thank you very much. Item number 2 on the agenda, the declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? So if they could indicate by raising their hand, please. No declarations to recall. Thank you, Colin. Item number 3 on the agenda then are the minutes meeting held on the 27th November 2023. Panel members have had a chance to go through those. A panel member is happy to agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of November.
Chair, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. I wanted to alert you to the fact in the minutes of the 27th of November, in section 29, which is page 4 of our agenda pack, there are 3 misspellings of the name of the person who attended that day from the public, and I have informed the Democratic Services officer of that.
Yeah, we have that, Chair, and that's noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other amendments? No, thank you very much. Then the panel is happy to note those as due and accurate record. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 4 then, a review of actions and recommendations from the previous meeting. Commissioner, I wonder if there's anything else you wish to report back on from the last meeting.
Thank you, Chair. There were 3 questions which I said, along with the team, we would take away. One related to the drug strategy, the national drug strategy from harm to hope, which seeks to, 1, reduce drug supply, engagement in treatment, so more treatment, improving recovery outcomes as well. Just a little idea of what we're now doing in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, because I think we mentioned that there is some significant funding behind this. I do attend regular meetings with the team who are delivering, and we are doing reasonably well, very well in fact, compared to many other areas. And those areas I will talk about, for example, numbers of specialist treatment has risen within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, meeting and exceeding national targets in some cases. Also, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have seen an increase in the number of drug and alcohol requirements issued by courts, which is quite significant. So these are court orders by magistrates and indeed Crown, where the defendant, one of the sentences they've got to go to drug treatment or alcohol treatment. So that's proved effective. And finally, drug-related deaths are on decline both in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So there are some significant positives there. Of note, enforcement is also part of that. I would make the point that actually it's the treatment, the rehabilitation, reducing demand, which will always give us the biggest win when it comes to combating drugs. Chair, there was another question. You'll recall there was a presentation on Opsoteria, which is national, and the constabulary response to the investigation of rape. I think we were asked for a breakdown in figures. I am informed that as of the 1st of December 23, there were 250 live rape cases being investigated by the constabulary's rape investigation team. 236 victims were female and 14 were male. And lastly, there was a question around ethnic minority background representation in the constabulary. My latest figures of the 30th of January is at 6.61% of our ethnic minority background, around 89% of white ethnicity, with 3.4% unknown. What I'm not sure on those figures, and a point that's been made for, and the Chief Constable could support me, is that often the ethnic minority backgrounds are defined by government. I've attended a number of passing out parades. It's clear that we should be recruiting a number of people with Eastern European backgrounds. And we look at the populations in Cambridgeshire, I think that's very significant, but I don't believe that's counted in these figures. I think it should be. But I do know that the constabulary have made really good progress. We had two Polish people of Polish ethnicity on the last intake, so that's good. Those are the questions. They are efficient answers.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We'll move on to item 5, public questions or statements. Colin, do we have any public questions?
Sorry, Chair.
Do we have any public
No,
questions?
sorry, Chair. No, we have none. Sorry, my connection went a little bit there. No, none, Chair.
No public questions.
No.
Thank you very much. In which case, we'll move on to item 6, the Preset report for 2024-25. Members have a chance to review those reports within the agenda pack. The item is for discussion on precept only. The panel is recommended to review and make a report to the Commissioner on the proposed policing precept element of the Council tax precept for 24-25. The proposed Council tax is an increase of 25 pence a week, bringing the policing element of Council tax on the band equivalent to £285.48. That's an increase of £12.96 compared to 22-23. Commissioner, would you like to present your report?
Thank you, Chair. And if the panel is satisfied, what I was going to do was a very brief introduction and then hand over to the Chief Constable for the operational context. The panel will be aware that the Chief Constable does not attend panel meetings other than this, but I think it's useful to hear the operational context because most importantly, it's probably worth reminding ourselves, and I do, that one of my statutory functions is holding the Chief Constable to account for the effective and efficient delivery of the police service across our county. But of course, it's my statutory responsibility to ensure that the Chief Constable has the resources to do that. And that's why I come to you here today with this proposal for the increase in the precept element of policing. But before I move on, because there could often be a debate as to how much we need to spend on policing. This is the amount of money that's been which government has allowed me to increase it to, so it is the maximum that I'm allowed to increase it to. But I always find it interesting if you look at the government website on police funding, it will tell you the amount, always with the maximum precept, and then the small print is if allowed by the Police and Crime Commissioner. The reason I make that point is that that amount of money is what is required, and certainly I've had many conversations with the Chief and the Head of Resources here as well, to run an effective and efficient police service here in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which is my primary concern. This is not one of politics, this is one of the requirement to keep people safe in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. When it comes to some of the constraints on our budget, I would just like to remind the panel of probably three elements. Really invest 80% is people, 50% of that are police officers. Will be aware of national office, which is welcome. Cambridge Constabulary and Chief Constable really well, whereby they've met and exceeded the number of extra police officers. And be aware that they received a significant pay rise last year as well, which was well deserved and needed. So most of the cost goes to people. That's the reality of it. So to say anything or to ask less of the precept element would mean people being fined in effect, lose money from government because part of your friends uplifts. Now, when it comes to the other elements, it's support staff. And I'll say this, there is a real risk that, actually, if we use any more support staff, we will have one of the best percentage in the budget as well. I have mentioned this a number of times when it comes to the funding and the central grant from government. We are one of the least funded per head of population across the country. Certainly in the bottom five, I would probably argue probably bottom two, given some of the census information that we received at the last census as well. And although I accept it's not just about population, particularly with differing crime types, that is a significant issue when it comes to policing this county. So, the panel will be reminded that on numerous occasions I have made this point around the funding formula. I can assure you whenever I have meetings or been in meetings with the policing minister or the Home Secretary, I've made this point time and time again. We have written along with our MPs. I can't give you definitively the position as we sit. The last I was informed that the proposals for the new formula had been written by the Home Office and ready for consultation and sitting with the Cabinet Office. More than that, other than I would prefer that this went out to consultation sooner rather than later. But that brings me on to my third point. Although I would make the assumption that we would be winners, what that looks like going forward, we don't know that. So future funding is unknown for policing. And therefore, if I wasn't to take that full £13, there would be a significant impact next year, the year after, and into the future. And I'm not prepared to do that to whoever's sitting here next year, having to ensure the Chief Constable has the appropriate resources. As I say, I will let the Chief Constable, because he's the one, along with the Head of Resources, who have made the case to me, give a little bit more detail around that. But I will just mention the survey. Part of my responsibility is to consult We've done this every year. This year we went out again. The numbers I think are in the papers. We had over 600 responses, which I know as a percentage is that's a very low percentage. I think there is a bit of an issue at the moment. A number of surveys were out. I think we had county council, combined authority. To be honest, I think actually that was quite a big number compared to some of the and if we were in health or the local authorities, I do understand that. But I do believe that the public out there are still supportive of policing and understand the requirement to pay for.
However, policing has different.
That's our fleet and the heating and all of those sort of things that we have in our households as well. So, panel, if I may, that the proposal is for that increase for the operational context. Chair, I'm happy to hand over to the Chief Constable if you think that's appropriate.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel, for the time this afternoon. I just want to outline, as the Commissioner has said, some operational areas of business over the last 12 months. I'll split them in 5 areas, if I may. The first position, as you would expect, being the police, is that about crime, our core responsibility here. You'd be aware that the government set baseline figures from 2019 about a reduction in crime in certain areas, and wrapped around it the National Performance Framework that we had to report on. Very pleasingly, in Cambridgeshire, we've had significant successes in those areas of crime which have been benchmarked from 2019. I'll just highlight a few without going into too many statistics. But with regards to neighbourhood crime, the county has seen a reduction by 23%. Reduction in residential burglaries in Cambridgeshire has reduced by 37%, robberies by 14.5%, and theft from vehicles across Cambridgeshire has dropped by 26%. Outcomes is particularly pleasing, seeing an increase in both prosecutions possible and over the overall outcome rate, and we now sit at just over 14%. In January, that figure was up to 16%. Overall crime nationally in the last 12 months has seen an increase. Here in Cambridgeshire, we have remained static, which is a positive story. In January alone this month, we saw a 12.5% reduction in overall crime, bringing us back into line. So a very positive story in relation to crime, both in terms of reductions of crime against those national benchmarks, but equally in terms of the prosecutions that we take forward on behalf of the public. In relation to demand, as the Commissioner has outlined, that has increased. There is no getting away from it. The demand and calls upon the policing service has increased both here in the constabulary and in line with national trends. As a flavour of that demand, 999 calls into our control room were around 150,000 in 2022. That's increased to over 171,000 that last year. That's an increase of over nearly 21,000 calls, each one of them with that extra complexity, with that threat, harm and risk of which my officers and staff have to respond to. But equally, the demand upon the force as that flows through the organisation is very natural. So demand has increased, but despite that, as I outlined at the first position statement on crime, we have managed to reduce crime significantly. The third aspect, which I'll just briefly brief you on, is that of people. As the Commissioner has outlined, a huge percentage of the budget is restricted and tied up in our people, both in terms of police officers and of police staff, who equally do a fantastic job in supporting and providing a policing service to this county. The Uplift programme, which was referred to, put targets on each individual England and Wales police force to uplift its numbers over the 3 years. And you may recall last year was the final year of that Uplift programme. The allocation over the 3 years for Cambridgeshire, the split and the allocation was based upon the funding formula. So not necessarily based upon what we need or the threat that the county is actually subject to. But despite that, 206 officers was the target. And over those 3 years, as the Commissioner has outlined, we have not only achieved that on each of the successive years of the programme, we've actually exceeded it. So the projection through to March this year puts us around 40 to 49 officers over our predicted target. So the head count come the 31st of March is predicted at 1771 officers, which, as I say, is around 46 officers over. That's over the uplift target. And of course, that comes with a consequence of increased budget restraints and increased budget pressures. But very pleasingly, through the hard work across the organisation, we have achieved those targets. You will equally have been aware that throughout the policing sort of landscape, the navigation of the intake routes across policing have altered dramatically. The fourth intake route, as it's called, and we like acronyms in policing, is called PSET. So there are now currently 5 intake lines within policing for people to join. I can confidently say with those uplift numbers, we're in a position, and probably the only police force in the country, to having paused our recruitment lines because we have so many people wanting to join Cambridgeshire. That is not the same within police forces across England and Wales. We have paused them. Of course, we consistently review that pause point in recruitment lines, but giving you a flavour, the last intake in the constabulary this financial year is in March. I have 16 places available to me on that intake in line with the uplift. Already, we have 58 candidates wanting to take up that position. So there is no issue, as I sit here today, in attracting people into policing, despite perhaps the negative connotations that are portrayed, as we know, within the media. Are we losing people, may you ask me, in terms of attrition rates? Well, we are the second lowest in terms of attrition across our most similar forces. So we do not lose people at the rate other forces are, as our attrition rate is 7.2%, which is in the bottom quartile nationally. But equally, as we are compared against a number of group of other forces within our most similar group, as it's called, we are the second lowest attrition rate, which is very pleasing indeed after the investment that we make in training and retaining officers. Third area is around operational successes. So operational successes you would expect, I will just highlight a couple. You may have seen the media around some high-profile drug importation and drug exploitation operations across the organisation and across the county in the last 12 months. 2 of those operations, one named Operation Tsunami, resulted in 48 people being arrested. 22 people charged, 88 individual drug charges. That resulted in 17 people, high-profile, prolific criminals, being remanded into prison, and a sentence of over more than 35 years for those 12 people. Over £250,000 of drugs were equally seized during that operation. We have a plan for Operation Tsunami 2 to hit the county very shortly. The other operation was called Operation Hypernova, again concentrated on county lines, on drug importation within the county. Again, very successful, 44 people arrested, 31 people charged, over £600,000 worth of drugs seized, and really pleasingly 33 drug lines dismantled of that importation into the county. So once again, the investment in the people, the training, the retention, the investment in terms of where we are with the organisation has led to some successful operations across, not only in terms of specifics around drug importation, but as I described at the opening of my sort of speech, across the whole broad spectrum of crime. Finally, as I did last year, very pleasingly, the precept was approved by the panel. And I promised that we would invest in digital investigation support, police staff, drugs experts, increase in police online investigation team, digital accreditation, and analytical capability, particularly around the national agenda of violence against women and girls. All of that precept has been invested. Those people have been recruited and are very much operational across the county. So my thanks go to both the Commissioner and yourselves as the panel for that investment last year. That really concludes sort of my brief operational overview of the constabulary over the last 12 months. Of course, you know, uplift of police officers, as the Commissioner said, is only one part of the organisation. Police staff play a very important part in the organisation. It's fair to say that the Police Uplift programme has really geared the organisation, as it does nationally, in terms of police uplift of police officers, but it does put pressure upon the budget with regards to police staff. Police staff have seen a 5.3 decrease in the constabulary over the last 12 months. And that very much ties in with the Commissioner's pitch today, that investment in the precept is very valuable and very needed in maintaining the staff numbers across the organisation. And that extends to volunteers, specials, etc., which could play a vital part in keeping this county safe. Just refer to one survey on an ending note about how people feel within the county. I think it was Norfolk County Council who did a recent survey. 85% of people in the county felt safe, and that's of course a huge responsibility, a huge contribution from members of the public, but an equal contribution from the organisation that I head. So that concludes my operational update. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Fan.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable and Commissioner. Do panel members have any questions? Councillor Bradnam.
Sorry, before we go any further, could I ask that the screen be changed such that it doesn't show the administrator's workings? Is it possible to do that? Because does it have to be displayed to the online stream? Okay, fine. So thank you very much to both the Commissioner and also to the Chief Constable for your presentations. I want to start with two things. I've got a number of things, but I'll just ask them in amongst other members. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the table which gives the overall figures about funding stream. It's on page 13. It's under paragraph 5.2, which is actually begins at the end of page 12. But it's a very strange graph in that it doesn't have any units on it. One can glean what it means by reading the subsequent text, but it's singularly unhelpful because it doesn't tell you if it's working in percentages or pounds or thousands of pounds or even millions. So we can work, as I say, out from what it says in the text. But one of the things later on, so it's just that was to do with, please can we have some units on tables in future? That would be really good. Moving on to page 27 in our agenda. We've got the you made reference to the additional officers and and we recognise that some of that funding, when with the new officers that came through uplift, some their salaries were government funded, but it didn't cover all the costs of kit and vehicles and infrastructure and even uniforms. So what I'm concerned about is the costs of the extra officers. We need to make sure that that is money well spent, and that means that we keep them for as long as possible. And on page 27, there's reference to the average length of service in response teams of 3 years, and that 303 of our officers are in the second or third year of their service. So what I wanted to be, or that they're student officers, and that 53% of our officers are relatively new officers in our frontline teams. So what I'm driving at is, what are we doing to make sure that our longer serve officers are being supported to stay in the force? What are we doing to retain? Because obviously our costs of recruitment are high, and we need to make sure that we're retaining all those expensive officers in the sense of the amount of money we've invested in them in their training. Sorry, that's a roundabout way of saying, what are we doing about retention? Thank you.
I'll hand over to the Chief Constable, but you make a couple of good points. I think the Chief's already talked about retention in the constabulary, but I'll let him speak to that. But I will make a point here when it comes to the regulations and conditions in policing. We do see police officers retiring, and often retiring based on from a job that they love, they would probably want to keep, but for financial reasons, because of pensions and things. Now, I know that this is currently being looked at in relation to the regulations, but myself, I was 48 years old when I retired from policing. I love policing, but a financial advisor spoke to me and said, you needed to go because you couldn't take a pension, etc., which seems a bit crazy to me, really. But that's part of the regulations. So that I think, regardless of what the Chief Constable does within the constabulary, there is also a requirement for people like myself to lobby those who come up with the regulations. By the way, this isn't unique to policing. Many other public sector organisations fall into this category as well. But that retention bit is really important. I'll hand over to the Chief.
Before the Chief comes in, could you just clarify, did you mean you would take a financial penalty if you couldn't carry on in the force because you've reached a particular age, so you have to retire? Is that what you're saying?
You don't have to retire, but you can't take a pension, with all the implications that would make, with lump sum and risk and risk of death. All those. It's a long conversation, but this is known by government. It basically made it very, very unattractive for people who could have stayed on or could stay on to stay on. That there are changes that are made and some changes that are ongoing, but this is part of a wider package. And my understanding is very similar in other organisations, health and doctors and tax implications. And I think we just need to look sensibly at keeping the right people in the right jobs.
Thank you. If only I was 48, but there we go. Look, in terms of retention, we do an awful lot. We recognise certainly the investment that has been made, the huge effort that has been made in terms of recruiting young officers. So let me first of all address the issue of retention of the student officers. As I've said, our attrition rate is really low, second lowest in our most similar forces and bottom quartile. Through the precept investments that we have made over successive years, we recognised early on in the Uplift programme that we had to put an infrastructure around the support for young inexperienced officers entering the organisation. And we developed some innovative units called CPDUs, which is Continual Professional Development Units, one in the north, one in the south, Peterborough and Cambridge. And they do a huge amount of work, both in terms of the young officers, guiding them through once they leave training school, into the districts through their tutorship, through their completion of what is termed their one file, their evidence to support them through their probationary service. So each shift, the 5 shifts at each location has a what is termed a professional coach, which is an experienced officer. Within that unit, there is a tradecraft officer, by which I mean an officer long in service, experienced, streetwise, who goes and teaches them the professional curiosity and skill on the ground. And what we've also invested within those CPDUs is a detective element, because the detective vacancies were quite high, both here in Cambridgeshire and nationally. We've done a huge amount to address that. And thankfully, our detective vacancies are very moderate now. But we put in a support mechanism, not only about uniformed officers, but also about detectives wishing either to enter the organisation as straight detectives or progressing through from uniform into detective investigations. We also recognised that we needed professional people. And what I mean by that is professional HR people. So in each of those units, there is one HR professional who again guides the officers and supports the officers around the avenues that they can take should they become under pressure. Right from the very beginning of their entry into the organisation, they have talks through the training school and the support, both from the Federation, from myself, from other avenues of well-being and support from HR, for example, in order to guide them through their first years in service. A couple of the pathways into the organisation and into policing now is an academic partner. And we have a strong relationship with our academic partner, and equally they provide wellbeing support, particularly around the academic aspects of their first years in service. We've also laid on, because when you analyse out why people are leaving the organisation, there are probably 2 top aspects. One of them is personal circumstances. So in the early days of the uplift, we've just come out of COVID. People were uncertain about the job market. They were looking for security. There was a huge advertisement campaign nationally from police around the uplift target. And dare I say, that put a really exciting advert about blue lights, firearms officers, dogs, you name it. These people could be line of duty officers within a couple of months. That's not the reality of policing. And therefore, once people and COVID and the pandemic had become a normality, if I could term it that way, then they quickly realized that what they'd entered was not the job and the profession that they thought they were entering. Thankfully, because of the recruitment and the reality conversations we have with officers entering the organisation, and those again were very few in Cambridge. The second reason why people leave is around frontline supervision, the sort of virtual hand guiding them through from their first and second line managers. And once again, we've done some tremendous work in providing some expertise, some supervisory training to our sergeants and inspectors. With that very bubble going through the organisation, what you do find is that the sergeants themselves can be very inexperienced and lacking those supervisory skills, which provide the support to the officers within the service. So that supervisory training has also been key to retaining people in the organisation. 2 final things. One is the culture. You cannot have been escaped anyone in terms of the narrative around policing as we move forward, and has been over the last 2 to 3 years. So our cultural work within the organisation is exemplary and has been noted by His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. Both are on frontline supervision, cultural and leadership workshops, which now have been embedded over the last year and a half within the organisation and been hugely successful. But also in terms of our cultural work about setting our values, setting our cultural statement, and really building to the last week, really, in terms of the new code of ethics, which has been launched across policing. So setting that environment for policing to stay, for police officers to stay within the organisation, is equally as important as the practical steps that we take around continuous professional development units, supervision, HR support, wellbeing networks, federation, etc. You are right to highlight that some of the older in service officers sometimes leave. If you look at the Police Federation surveys, they always highlight a high percentage of officers perhaps wanting to leave policing. They don't. The reality is they do not leave. And that is okay. There is some practical element and financial element, as the Commissioner has outlined, of relation to pension. But pension is a choice as to whether people leave. And if it was that bad, my sentiment would be people wouldn't be in policing. It is such a tough job that people just wouldn't stay for a pension. Of course, there's always one or two who would, but my take is that people would leave. We don't get that. So people do see it through. Now, whether that is a long-term sustainability within society is different. I was quite surprised the other day when I interviewed a couple of people who were leaving policing, having done their 30 years, and their children were in their latter part of sort of secondary school, sixth form, etc., in that sort of area. And educational establishments were actually informing people that in order to get a good career, you needed to move. You needed to consistently transition between jobs, between vocations, etc. That's not what the reality of policing is, and we will always accept that society brings in, different generational diversity and thought. But if we are informing people at an early late stage of their life that they shouldn't be staying in any profession for more than 2 or 3 years, then you're already on the back foot. But we are doing a lot in terms of retention, and as I said, our figures do reflect that those are low. If that helps.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you very much. And I'm really relieved to hear what you're saying about retention of the younger officers, because I'm sure others in this room were at the Police and Crime Conference some years ago when we had a presentation which was really quite serious about the impact of the culture on new and particularly women recruits to the police, which was significantly negative. So I'm actually very encouraged that what you're saying here is that we're doing a really good job of improving the culture in our police force, and I'm very relieved to hear it. And I think, did you say 7% attrition is actually really pretty good as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much for that reassurance.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Green light. That's it. You can hear now. Thank you. That came around quicker than I thought it was going to. Just talking through some of the aspects that have been drawn out already, in terms of if we were to reduce our budget in any way, that it would essentially mean having to get rid of non-warranted staff to be able to do that, and ultimately that would be kind of flying in the face of reasonability in terms of those jobs would still need to be done, and so therefore you would essentially be pulling off warranted officers from the streets in order to do those roles, presumably at a higher rate of pay than the people that they were replacing, which it doesn't scream value to me. And you also said something about a 5% reduction last year in that staffing. So I do have a question around whether or not this new budget means that there will be a continuation of the numbers, or whether or not there will be further decline in the numbers of non-warranted staff. And just wanted to also say about the, to a certain extent, government has slowed this process to a degree to give the illusion of that we have we can decide where this level is, but ultimately the way they've loaded the guns in terms of saying, well, if you drop the number of officers, then you don't get this bonus. It's very much from local government side, either unitary council or district or county. Essentially, if we don't put up the amount that they, the full amount, that there are penalties to be paid. So to a certain extent, I feel that we are almost going through the motions, because the result is we're kind of being forced out. We're being tunneled into this by government to toe the line, as it were. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on a couple of those points.
I'm sure the Chief Constable has probably not on the government. He'd probably stay politically neutral around that. But you make a really good point around de-civilianisation, because it's not only a value for money issue. When we're out there, and you as councillors will have to, this is about police officers, warranted police officers doing what only warranted police officers can do. Whereas, if we then put them in offices where we can have some really good support staff people doing it, we don't want our police officers doing those jobs. As simple as that. And I don't believe the public want police officers doing those jobs. I will sit on the fence slightly in relation to the second point, other than, this was the policy around more police officers, which I don't, that's what I hear when I'm out and about. We want more police, so I think that was a good policy. When it comes to the funding, I will always make the case, regardless of any political allegiance, that we in Cambridgeshire do not receive a fair deal. And I will always make that case. What I will say is there has been a significant increase into cash into policing, which is welcome by me. But as Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm sure the Chief Constable will say the same thing. The more, the better, to keep the good people of our county safe.
Thank you.
I thought they were better than us. Maybe they're not so. Just as a further thing, in terms of with report to page 25, we've got a comparison of other the most similar forces. How are those chosen to be most similar forces? It seems to me that the likes of Devon and Cornwall and Avon and Somerset face vastly different challenges than Cambridgeshire, and that maybe Cambridgeshire might be something that would be more akin to what we face in Cambridgeshire. And I just wondered, how were those chosen? Are they chosen by somebody else, or were they chosen by yourselves?
They were not chosen by ourselves. Had we the choice, there would be a bunch of others, I can assure you. And you do make a good point. Devon and Cornwall, my colleague and friend, the Police and Crime Commissioner there, will make the point every summer their population increases by double, triple, quadruple. Yet the funding formula doesn't recognise. The health system funding formula doesn't recognise that. So, these are things that need to be worked through. I'm informed that they are put together by the HMIC, FRS, based on a number of indicators, so probably things like crime types, demographics, those sort of things. I'm sure we could get you the detail, but unless John had anything to add, that's my understanding.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, excuse me. Last year, I was sat there. You were down this end, and you sort of predicated the budget or the precept on a 2% increase. And it says here a core grant of 5.3 includes a government contribution to the nationally unforeseen 7% pay increase. This year's is based on 2.5%. What's your crystal ball saying for this year?
Those figures based on the spending review, the comprehensive spending review, which was published 2 years ago. So that is what has been allocated within CSR to policing. So that is what goes in our budget. And we will make the case very, very strongly, both police and crime commissioners and chief constables, that any additional money to that 2.5% should come from government. I'm pleased to say that's exactly what happened. The additionality came from government. So we defined it from that 2.5% from our budget. The rest was centrally funded. And in this day and age, I think that was the policing minister thought hard on that. What I would say, and there is a point to be made here once again about our position in Cambridgeshire, although it was funded, it was based on core grant. So stay with me, because sometimes I have to think this one through. It was based on the core grant, what we get from government. So we get 56% of our finances on core grant. Somewhere like Merseyside, probably 80%, something like that. So you can probably begin to see where I'm coming from now. It didn't actually pay for the police officers' pay increase. And in fact, here in Cambridgeshire, we had to find some extra money to pay for that. So it wasn't actually all centrally funded. This comes back to that necessity to get this funding formula dealt with for once and for all, so we get a better deal here in Cambridgeshire.
If I can just come back on that again, I mean, obviously we're on your side in terms of underfunding compared with, if you look at Wiltshire, they seem to be a comparator. Why are we leaner than them? How does that? I think it's going on from Christian Hogg was saying. How does that actually work? And yet we're so close. We're in the magnetic pull of the Met, and everything that goes with it. So everything that comes out, it's you were only just over the border. So how does it actually work that we never seem to get a fair share of that funding compared to Sleepy Wiltshire? I'm not having a pop at Wiltshire, but
I mean, I suppose when they do those comparators, it's done by HMRC based on a number of things. Actually, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is a safe place to live compared to many other parts of the country. We know that. We live here ourselves. And yes, there are issues and there are problems like there are everywhere, like in Wiltshire. We almost punished for being a safe place with a good police force, sometimes it feels. But I've said time and time again, we will continue to make that case, and I will continue to hold the chief to account with the resources available to him to deliver the very best police service that he can.
So on that basis, where the chief actually said, let me where I wrote it down. 85% of people feel safe, and obviously there's been although we've got an increase in 999 calls, there's been a decrease. How do you frame that when you go back when the 999 calls have gone up 20k or whatever it is, and yet most people feel safe and crime numbers are dropping? How do you square that particular circle? Because it's very difficult then, based on what you're saying, is that it's Cambridgeshire, isn't it? You're okay, you're safe.
And I think that comes back to my previous point, because the Chief Constable is running an effective, efficient police service. We have seen across the country, and I will not name names, but where that's not happened, additional money's gone in. And we see that with local authorities, don't we? I believe in a fair playing field here, and I will fight for every penny that we can get here. We want to see crime drop. But no one can be complacent. The chief's already given the operational context here as well. We cannot be complacent. And people I speak to out there when I'm out and about, are basically saying the same thing, that they want an efficient and effective police force who are going to turn up when they need them and investigate those crimes. And probably most importantly, it's not on the tip of everyone's tongue, but probably something we all think about is the prevention. But it's actually preventing crime in the first place. So actually, crime can go down. That in itself can take a lot of effort. The chief would know better than I in relation to how that prevention piece is working. So those are all the arguments that I would make. Okay, it's going down because of that investment in prevention, and we need to keep that investment in prevention. Yeah.
I just make one point just on the back of how you square that circle is the increase in 999 calls don't automatically mean an increase in crime. Crime is only a small part of actually the demand into the organisation. Other stuff such as mental health, demand upon children's services, there's a whole host of stuff which brings in demand, which is linked to that 20,000 uplift of 999 calls. So that we're very successful at our core business in terms of reducing crime, but there's a whole host of things which adds extra demand of why this precept is known. Okay.
Do you wish to keep talking, Councillor Jones?
Yeah, there's no okay. Come on, there's no huge. Interestingly, I mean, again, the Met have said they're not going to respond to mental health under threat, risk, and harm. where does that, as how much of that increase has been a demand on the service for people who want a 9 to 9 cornet on Sunday night, or and how are Cambridgeshire dealing with people who are in mental health crisis but don't cross the threshold of threat, potentially threat, risk, and harm? How does how are you managing to deal with that? And is that a significant part of that uplift in 9-9 calls, perhaps?
Could talk for quite a while on this subject, but I think it's an operational matter. And seeing we have the chief here, I'll allow the chief constable to answer that one. I know. Okay, so what the meta referring to is the national right care right person, and that's where the debate has been held. I think first and foremost, before criticism may or may not be levelled at policing around what we do and what we don't respond to, we have to put this into context that this was a national partnership arrangement, a national agreement between a number of services, not just policing saying we are not going to attend. That partnership arrangement and that agreement was signed in July last year nationally and equally had government support. What we are confident here within Cambridgeshire, and we have made it very clear to not only the public but equally our partners, is that where there is a risk to life, we will always respond. That's our core business about saving life, prevention and detection of crime. That's fine. Sorry. That's okay. So in terms of right care, right person and that response around mental health, then what we've done, we already started from a very good position here in Cambridgeshire, is that we had quite a robust policy about concerns for welfare. So concerns for welfare about people, as it sounds on the tin, who people ring up about the concern for welfare of someone, then we will always go through any call around a threat of vulnerability, around risk, around harm, before we make an assessment as to whether we deploy or not. And that will continue. Whether right care or right person was in or is in place, we will always do that assessment. And so our move towards right care, right person, which has been praised nationally from the national team, has been that early engagement with partners about making it in a step-by-step progress about concerns for welfare, people who go missing from institutions or hospitals next, and then into the mental health arena. But at each stage of that phased approach, we are assessing it not only against impact upon the organisation, but about threat, about legality, about public perception as well. In terms of that 20,000 extra calls, then it's around just over 5% of calls which are mental health related into the organisation. Now, that figure, when you start to analyse out, has really not increased dramatically over years. What has led to the demand upon policing is the ability of other support agencies and other partners to respond. So the time it takes for an officer to deploy to reach a case of someone in mental health crisis may be the same. In fact, we've done remarkably well about that response because we have trained mental health nurses within our control room to assess that information first, to redirect to that caller, or to provide additional information to the officer attending. We equally have a joint mental health police officer response car, which attends, which assesses, which has access to specialist assistance. But what has increased is actually the handover time. So when the officer makes the decision to 136 a person in mental health crisis, or detain them under the Mental Health Act, they then have to remove them to a place of safety, as you would expect. It's that waiting time for us to hand them over officially to our partners, which has increased. And equally, of course, as we've seen across society, the complexity of those 5.x% of cause of mental health has equally increased. So it's not just about pure numbers. So that's just one small element of the demand around mental health. We, as I've referred to, is young people in crisis, young people in need also has increased. We see, the road network providing additional demands upon policing around RTCs. But as the Commissioner rightly articulates, one of the key aspects of policing is about prevention. How can we start
turning the tide upon reducing down crime, not by proactivity, but by prevention? How do we reduce casualties on the roads by designing out designing out roads, etc., to reduce casualties? How do we get across and work with our partnerships about people in mental health crisis that we've got the diversionary techniques and pathways out of people should they come in custody? That's an important element of the investment that we should be making within policing and equally with our partners.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank the Chief Constable and the Police Crime Commissioner for the comments so far. It's really informative. I've got two questions. Oh, sorry. Okay, I've got two questions. One is to do with collaboration and efficiency to do with collaboration. So I noted in the report on page 38, there's a discussion of various projects that have sort of collaboration projects with neighbouring forces. Is there anything that you would like to highlight in there as particularly effective things that have taken place, please?
I will hand over to the constabulary team in a moment. I think it was probably worth just putting the wider context of the collaboration. And in fact, the number of collaborations, there will be collaborations that the constabulary are in nationally, regionally with 7 forces, but most significantly it is with Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, where it's around 30% of our budget goes into those collaborated services. I don't have the figures here, but that has saved an awful lot of money over the years, an awful lot. And what I would say is probably more mature collaboration, probably than anywhere in the country. 3 forces and the amount of collaboration that's done. So in itself, that has saved significant amounts of money, which has enabled more investment into that local as well, because that's the important bit. What do we do with that money that's being saved? A lot of it, was because of austerity, and that was one of the drivers. Was less money in policing. But it's also important when we're talking about the budgetary constraints here. 30% of our budget goes in to that collaboration. And therefore, we then have 6 corporate sols, the chiefs and the PCCs. What I can say today, and certainly within my term of office, it seems like a mature relationship that the PCCs and chief constables have had. And we continue to see that it is an effective collaboration which has delivered considerable savings. But once again, that's an area that needs scrutiny. That's 30% of our budget, and so we need to look very closely at that. Obviously, that is good value for me as well. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add on that.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose just reminding us all where collaboration first started. That started from the discussions around mergers of police forces some considerable time ago. And the reason why, for various reasons, it moved into collaboration rather than merger. The actual basis upon collaboration was not built upon cost savings. It wasn't built on efficiencies. It was about increasing capacity and increasing our capability to deal with complexity and high risk crime. How do we do things better together? One of the natural consequences, of course, is efficiencies and cost savings. But just a couple of things which I think have been particularly relevant over not just the last 12 months, but probably the 18 months and 2 years. We've already mentioned uplift and recruitment, and the considerable work of HR collaborated services has enabled us as a constabulary individually across BCH to recruit to those officers' numbers. Without that collaboration, we'd have struggled alone. The other aspect, of course, is the training with the academic partner. As I said, and that joined up collaboration with our academic partner. This academic partner delivers not only to BCH, but across the Eastern region. And of course, as I mentioned and touched upon, around culture and around integrity of the organisation, then what's been particularly good over the last certain 12 to 18 months is the surety of integrity of the of policing, through the increase and the collaboration around professional services, professional standards department, and equally around vetting, about securing up that pipeline into the organisation that we've got the right people in there, but equally, and they step above the mark. We've got professional standards and we've got vetting in order to identify those people at an early stage. And the final two bits is one is around, as I've said, high risk, high harm threats to the county. You know, Joint Protective Services provide that intrinsic link around firearms, dogs, major crime in terms of those investigations, none of which I'm sure we could afford individually as an organisation. So that, going back to that increased capacity and capability, really critical. And finally, just your protection. You know, it can't be lost on us in terms of the cyber world or that space. Information Management Department and the protection of online systems is an increasing threat here and now. And the work across that department to secure up our security online has been particularly impressive over the last 12 to 18 months, just to secure up our systems. So I think there's huge benefits in collaboration, but as the Commissioner has said, of course, we consistently need to review.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. Sorry, did you want to come?
Sorry, yeah. Do you wish? Right, okay.
This on. Thank you, and thanks for those answers. It's actually really helpful to hear both from a financial point of view and from an operational view the benefits of this. My second question is back actually to something that's been raised in different ways by most of us, which is the government grant. It's disappointing that it remains low. The percentage increase has been relatively low. We're historically low funded. And I wondered whether what the sort of timescale was around that process of it being reviewed. Is there a working group? What are the sorts of strategies to try and deal with improving our settlement with the national government? How much is in our control?
So, firstly, for clarity, from my point of view, I just want to make the point that we have seen significant investment in policing. We can all take a personal view as to whether that's enough or not, but you know, under this current government, there has been, you know, that 20,000 uplift was a 20,000 uplift. Some will argue it's just replacing those that were lost. That's not the case here in Cambridgeshire. In Cambridgeshire, there truly is significantly more police officers than elsewhere. A direct answer to your next question, my understanding is the work has been done by the Home Office. The proposals are there. It sits elsewhere in Whitehall, and despite significant lobbying across, well, actually, probably more from Conservative police and crime commissioners, to be honest with you, we still don't have a time frame for that consultation to go public. I do make the point to ministers that a commitment was made by previous Home Secretary that this would be completed in this government term. I can say no more than that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Branham.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I have two questions, and the first one lies around capital projects. And as the County Councillor for Waterbeach Division, I can confirm we are breaking ground on the new Southern Hub, and I wish it well. But in that paragraph on page 40, it's paragraph 4.5.4, it also refers to a 3-4, so the BCH Operational Support Unit Training Facility, and a new firing range. And I just wondered whether, oh, we're being plunged into darkness. I wondered whether you have explored the possibility of using any of the firing facilities that exist within partners. So, for example, the military locally. I mean, after all, we are right on Alconbury, Weald and Alconbury, even with the USAF possibly. So I just wondered, have you explored options for using firing facilities elsewhere? And I have a second question that I'll wait till you've finished on.
In brief, the answer to that is yes. I mean, there is a project team that the chief may want to answer more, but we are briefed. We will sit on those meetings as well, the strategic meetings, looking at each one of these projects. Clearly, you mentioned the Southern Police Station. That's a Cambridgeshire standalone commitment. Yep, pleasingly, it's being built as we speak. In relation to those other two areas, they are part of a collaborative conversation as to the operational requirements. So firing range being an operational requirement. I do know that lots of inquiries have been made, both with other police forces and with partners. Without doing the detail, I know it gets rather tricky and complicated when trying to pair up with the military in such matters, given that policing and military firearms, training is probably very different. I don't know, Chief, if you want to add any further to that. No, but that's a question that police and crime commissioners will ask every time. Have you explored this, and this? Probably a bit too much, actually, because we'll try and problem solve as well. But very alert to that, and it's certainly part of the project team's thinking.
And obviously, the reason I'm asking that is because you rightly say in the papers that actually the requirements around the noise and proximity of residents, it's quite a difficult thing to build successfully. And so it would seem, since these facilities almost certainly exist within the military bases around the whole of the county, it would seem sensible to see if that was a possibility. But I'm sure teams are looking into it. So thank you. The second one is closer to home, and it's about your own office. And I will just ask the question, does the Commissioner regularly review his office staffing requirement?
Yes. In fact, I had that conversation on the walk here today with my chief executive. Okay, let me deal with that one head on as well, because quite often it'll be brought up the cost of the Police and Crime Commissioner, of the office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And I will make this point. What preceded this was policing authorities. I don't have the figure in front of me, but I suspect it was at least equal the cost, if not more, and didn't do all the functions that the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner does, particularly in relation to the victims, some of the streaming funds in from government. We just talked about From Harm to Hope, the drug strategy. Well, and they're not properly funded from any of the streaming funds, but my office is very much leading much of that. And if it wasn't my office, then the Chief Constable would have to do this with one of his team as well. I think it's also, I don't have all the figures in front of me, but my office brought in far more than what actually they cost in additional funds. And that's because they're brilliant at doing that. We've got some really good people who actually help out other partners in this area as well. So funds coming in to tackle the blight of domestic abuse, sexual violence, child abuse, all those sort of things. We punch above our weight. Do I review it? Yes, I absolutely do. But that works both ways. Do we need additional capacity to bring extra money in to keep people safe? That's part of the conversation as well. So it's not just about reductions, it's about, actually reviewing the requirement and the requirement of my office.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Councillor Jones.
Nice segue into this. Couple of things. On it's 4.6.3 on page 21. Excuse me. The Constable is one of only a few forces to have a memorandum of agreement with the Home Office, and it brought in 250k. I mean, looks a nice little earner. Is there anything else that you can do that brings in other income generating alternatives? And I've got a follow-up question for you, Darryl, if I
may. Without looking through the papers, I think I understand what that one was, and I think that was something that the Deputy Chief Constable was involved in, isn't it? Yeah. Some excellent work which is being replicated both in this country and across the world, which is sort of copyrighted by, for want of a better word, the constabulary. Income generation in policing, it's a word often used. It's pretty difficult, really. And actually, it can be quite divisive. An interesting one is football matches. There's a big push that football, particularly expensive, rich football teams should be paying for the policing. It's an interesting one and a matter of opinion, because of course you could also argue that the police have a requirement to maintain the King's peace. But to cut to the chase, there is an amount of income generation. There are charges that are made, but it's not that there's not a significant pot of money to be made there. But coming back to the point that was made around new developments like firearms rages, like public order venues, etc. Certainly, when looking at that, there is a potential as well to look at additional capacity, which you can then outsource to other police forces, because they will also have requirements as well. That's been looked at. I know that the team here will always be looking at that income generation.
So does, by virtue of the fact that Cambridge is one of the few forces to have this MOA, does it mean that it is divisive, or what is it that we are doing that many other forces aren't, just to bring that level of income in? Or is that is that not popular in other forces, for instance?
Sorry, I probably confused that. If it's in relate, yeah, it's no. That is something actually that Cambridge does, which is really good, which they have an agreement with the Home Office to go and train others. I'll let the Chief talk around that better. Where the bit, I wouldn't say divisive, but there are two sides to the argument, is paying for police services. I mean, actually inside a football ground, I think a football ground pay for it. Outside, that's the issue.
Yeah, just to clarify, the memorandum of understanding is quite innovative, and through the leadership of Deputy Chief Constable Jane Guyford, she's been able to forge relationships with the Home Office in order to put Cambridgeshire right at the foot of that. And what that in essence does is provide international assistance both here and abroad for officers and staff who want to have the opportunity to experience policing abroad, and also to host international organisations here in the UK. But really what the government's agenda and what the Home Office's Foreign Commonwealth Office agenda here is, where are foreign countries having an impact upon UK policing? For instance, drug importation, for instance, getting across neighbourhood policing, for instance, around intelligence. So we're able to provide that expertise to those specified countries which are all approved, in order to provide that expertise and to enhance policing abroad, actually impact upon UK policing. So we get upstream. Why other forces haven't taken on board? Well, they have got a chief constable like I have, who's quite innovative. And we've just taken advantage of the opportunity, our relationships with the Home Office. And we have got it now built in the medium-term financial strategy, an ongoing commitment to that memorandum of understanding, which will bring in that sustainable money. On other areas, innovation is key to the organisation, and we look at every opportunity to try and be business-like in our thinking around trademarking, start bringing in income generation. We've done a number of stuff across not only just BCH, but also across the Eastern region, for instance, where we've tried to take that to the fore. So definitely something we're quite proud of. It's been mentioned as I refer back to the HMIC report. It's in there as innovative practice and good practice, and our relationship with the International Policing Coordination Committee, it far exceeds any other force across the country. So a good story for Cambridgeshire.
Can I follow that up with a question for Darryl, please? Stop and start again. Darryl, just further down on 4.7.1, I've just recently joined the Safer Peterborough Partnership, which I have to say was something of a closed book, and I think you were the same thing until I joined this committee about a year ago. So, well, that's how that genuine. One of the issues that's come right to the fore for me is that whilst you bring in lots of funding, they seem to be relatively small pots that seem to be for community groups. That's great, that's fine. But we're talking about high harms, we're talking about community safety. Shona was on the call yesterday. Is there anything that you can do from the grants that makes it that something like the Safer Peterborough Partnership isn't bidding for small slices of the cake? Help to get some of these strategies. There's a lot of cross, but there doesn't seem much verticality. And can you help with that, please?
So you're probably referring to there are a couple of funds which my office put out there. One is the youth fund, which is fairly low amounts of money, which actually I think works really well for what it's designed for. You're probably then talking about the community fund, which the CSPs or the Safer Peterborough Partnership have access to, and that's up to £5,000, which isn't insignificant, but I get that it's not a vast amount. I mean, the reality of this, we have, what is it, the 6 across the county. Any money that I have will be taken from policing unless it's bid for, centrally, and we're successful. And we have done that. So Safer Streets, for example, which the Safer Peterborough Partnership are involved in, we've had a significant amount of money to Peterborough come through that. So that's one area, and it was the partnership that came together for the bid. So that was a significant amount of money. Things like the drug strategy, the money coming down through there. That is another big pot of money which the partners, and sometimes it's not just that meeting of partners, because it's the statutory requirement of all those partners there, the local authority, the police. I've mentioned before about the High Harms Board that I chair, which all the chairs of the CSPs sit on as well. So I think the answer is, my view is there are a number of things going on already across the county. Those bigger projects, those high harm, high risk areas, which we all know are really important, child exploitation, county lines, all the modern day slavery, really important. And there are a number of things going on around that. What this particular fund, the community fund, was there to plug was kind of what we're hearing time and time again, quite often from you as local councillors. We have this issue in this locality, but there's nothing to address it. And I think I gave some examples last time, but there's some really good examples of how this has worked and helped local local communities. But the point you make is valid. I'm coming up to the end of this term. Who sees what happens next? But there's always those conversations to be had. But as I say, there isn't a big pot of money there, and any money, generally speaking, that I would get from the policing budget, well, that's taking it away from the chief constable, which I'm not prepared to do. So that's why we need to keep going to government for all these funds, off the shelf, ready to go projects. Hope that answers your question. But work in progress. We'll review.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. This is my last question, or rather observation. And I had also highlighted virtually all of paragraph 4.7.1 on page 42, because I wanted to thank the Commissioner for the work that you have done on actually getting money for all of those projects which have clear benefits, and particularly because these deal with domestic abuse and violence against women, and looking at the High Harms Board. And I think you have done I'm very pleased. I know we've bashed you a bit about lobbying government over the government grant, and I know that's something, the Fair Funding Review, and I know that's something that you have worked on. But these are things that have come to our area, and I just did want to say thank you for doing that, because making bids is never easy. So I'm very glad that you've got money for our area to do those things. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
These are all areas that I am absolutely passionate about, as you know, having worked in those areas. But it would be remiss of me not to actually say, thank you to the brilliant team, both in my office, in the police, and across the partnership. I think we've got some really dedicated, good people in this county, and that's why we're punching above our weight in pulling in central funds to tackle some of these awful things that we need to tackle.
Thank you, Councillor Varkey.
Thank you.
First of all, apology. I went to Peterborough. I thought the meeting was there. I'm sorry for being late. And before I ask this question, I just want to declare an interest. I'm a duty solicitor. So we had a couple of meetings last week in Cambridge. Some of them involved the local residents and local councillors. The view is that when it comes to high harm or high risk offences, you're up for there. You're ready for action. But when it comes to the like small offences like the stealing bike or shoplifting, you're not that keen. My question is this: when you are bringing lots of money in, do you have any specific area of funding where you can address these minor offences where the community feels that they're safe? As I have explained to you, one of my own examples, it was he went into my house and the officers were so rushed to close file, then I had to plead to just reopen the file. And that's one. And the second one, I don't know whether this is a funding issue. If you have detainees in the police station, and suppose the remand court is in Cambridge, what usually happens now, you collect the detainee from Peterborough, then this one travel to Norwich, no, King's Lynn, and then come to Huntingdon police station, collect the detainees from there, and then they come all the way to Cambridge. By the time it is 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, what happens actually is, suppose if you have 8, 9 detainees in the ward, literally the court has not the capacity to run this. Then so you're bringing them back to the irrelevant cells and you're leaving them there. It is costing a significant amount of money for the police. And of course, the person who is detained, he's been kept there again, and you have to do this process again. So my question is this: do you have some kind of financial crisis there? Unless the usual practice is simply get someone from Peterborough to Cambridge, another one from King's Lynn to Cambridge, one from Huntingdon to Cambridge. Instead of that, why one is just going all the way around, and us, we are just wasting the resources that we have in the whole the court, lawyers. We are getting paid for that, even though we are sitting there. But why we are wasting that resources? Do we actually have a problem of funding when you're bringing in this much of funds in? That's my question.
So, I mean, strategically, the answer to the problem of funding, what we're presenting today by the really good work of the Director of Resources and others, is a balanced budget. So, a financial crisis certainly isn't the word that I would use. Can I just say the first bit? Basically, what you're saying is something which I hear time and time again. I think there is significant confidence, a lot of confidence in policing to deal with high harm, high risk, and I see that day to day as well. I think perhaps sometimes we see in local communities less confidence around what some people might say low-level crime. I think that's not the term I would ever use. So you're a Cambridge City Councillor. Take the issue of bike crime. You mentioned bike crime. I haven't got the latest figures, but I think we're about 60% down on reported bike crime, and that's a result. The Chief Constable has dedicated, some work around that, and they've done a brilliant job, and they've managed to do that. But obviously, it's for the chief to decide operationally where he deploys and what have you. But could I just come back, because this will never be about policing alone. It can never be about policing alone. So that bike crime in Cambridge City has gone down because, one, there probably is a bit more police involvement. I don't know, but actually it's a partnership. There was a task group set up across the partners, including the railway company, etc. And it was all those partners coming together. That's why we've seen such a reduction. But coming to the point around that community fund, that's certainly something, and Cambridge are really good at bidding into that. There's lots of projects, CCTV, and all kinds of things, lighting, street lighting, that I funded in Cambridge City because they're very good at bidding as well. So from my point of view, what I can impact I'm absolutely doing that. I don't know if the chief has got anything he wants to add.
There's just the issue on prisoner detainees and moving around the county. One that the movement of detainees from from police cells into court is not a police job. That is done by a private company under a private arrangement. So we don't waste police time in terms of transporting detainees from police cells who are under remand to the court next day. But what we have within our control is a review of where our custody facilities are and the use of them, etc. And we are doing that review. And equally, of course, with the new Southern Policing Hub at Milton, that will provide extra capacity, but also extra efficiency in the movement of detainees from what we can control, if that provides just some reassurance. Police officers are not transporting detainees around the county into court cells.
So when you say this is a private companies operating, is it a contract by Cambridgeshire Constabulary, or is in nationally or centrally done this contract? If it is through the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, I agree police officers are not dropping them to court. Can we not ask them there are concerns within the service usage? And the second question is 60% reduction in bike crime. Apology, I'm putting this way. My view is not exactly as you might think it is. There could be two reasons it has gone down. One being, like I said, in the last week we had the meeting, the people have lost the trust. They don't care, but they don't want to report it. What's the point reporting? It's a small crime. The police is not bothered. My own example. And that could be one reason it's gone down. Thank you.
I'll let the chief answer the issue about the prisoner transport. I take on board sometimes there is an apathy in reporting. I will take this opportunity once again, particularly you as community leaders, please do ask your residents and groups to report, because the way I can hold the chief constable to account, and the chief constable has the data and information. And I know that there can be problems reporting and frustrations, but I would ask that to happen. I'll just make one point, and I was asked about, because residential burglary has gone down significantly, and someone made that very point. Firstly, I believe most people who are burgled will report to police for a number of reasons, including insurance. Bikes, I would make this, it's always been the case that people won't report it. I had a bike stolen a few years ago and I didn't report it. Me of all people, I tell myself off now, and now I've got them all registered on Bike Register, etc. But I think that's always been the case. I think showing a 60% decrease on reported crime, to me, tells me that it's going down. And it might not be, it might be 45%, 50%, but it's heading in the right direction. So there's some good work. But I take on board what you're saying, but I don't think it's different now than probably it has been in the past few years when it comes to reporting of crime. Of course, the other statistics that are used, or I don't think we've got them on bike crime, is the Office of National Statistics, which, because recorded police crime isn't always the best indicator of crime. I've said this time and time again here, quite often you will see drugs crime going right up. Well, that's normally because the police are going out and catching, well, you're knowing your profession, catching drug dealers, therefore we've got something to report. But I still think bike crime's gone down. I think they've done a great job down there in Cambridge.
Yeah, just to the contract with the around the detainees, the prisoners moving around as a national contract. That's with the courts, not with police. But we will just check on that. So it's not our contract. Just in terms of just backing up what the commissioner said around the 60%. Okay, we can argue about the percentages, but actually, when you look at the amount of people we've arrested and prosecuted for bike thefts, that has got to have an impact in terms of the reduction. And yes, of course, people sometimes don't report crime. That's only natural for a variety of reasons, not just perhaps a loss in trust within policing. But I notice you're from Cambridge City Council. I'd implore you to go to Parkside and make contact with the district commander and have a look at his spree offending team. that may just provide you with a good reassurance about that type of crime which you are describing and the efforts that the Southern District are going to lock up and to prevent and equally detect crimes of that nature.
Thank you very much. One final question from Councillor.
This is just released by Inner Anorak. This is, you mention in the papers the Kingsland custody suite, but it doesn't appear on page 90. Is there any particular reason for that? You've got all the, yeah, but you do mention it in the papers, the Kingsland custody suite, and you've just, nice, you mentioned it before, but it doesn't actually appear on the map. Is any particular, or have you just got rid of it? Made a few quid.
It's not ours, that's why. Yeah.
Provisioning costs, why was it? It just got mentioned, that's all.
We pay for a service, but it's not our estate. If that, yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Councillor Radnam.
To you, Chair, not to the Police and Crime Commissioner. I take it we make a decision about this after the Police and Crime Commissioner has left? Or do we do it now? Okay, thank you. I'm sure you're coming on to that.
Yes, I am. Right, do we have any further questions? Okay, in which case I am going to read you from my very helpfully prepared chair's briefing, just so that I'm sure that we've got this right. So the panel can choose to do one of the following. We can choose to support the precept without qualification or comment. We can support the precept and make recommendation.
I wanted to check if there's anything that we can read to follow what you're saying about the decision. I just can't see it on the agenda, that's all. Is there a page number or is it only on your script? Okay.
So we can support without comment. We can support the precept and make recommendation. Each recommendation obviously will need to be made and then seconded, and then the panel will need to agree whether they all agree to take that forward. We can veto the proposed precept. That would require a majority of at least 2/3 of the membership of the panel, which at the current time would be 9 members. There are 8 members present around the table and 1 on screen. Colin, I don't know whether anybody who gave their apologies indicated how they felt.
Sorry, Claire.
Colin
Colin's had to
is still there somewhere.
Can you hear me, Claire?
Oh, okay, well, we'll come back to that maybe. So I'm going to read you. The legislation indicates the Commissioner must propose a precept for the panel to review and consider to whether to exercise its power of veto. It is not therefore a matter for the panel to approve, merely to consider whether to veto. As such, I would like to ask the members present to raise their hand if you think the panel should veto the Commissioner's proposed precept.
Thank you. Sorry, you very helpfully explained to us earlier on that a veto would require 2/3 of the panel. And since we only have 8 people in the room and the other 9th person is on screen, I suspect we are not empowered to veto because we only have 8 people here in the room to vote in person. And I wonder if we could take legal advice on that.
We certainly can. Rachel, would you like to comment? Which is why I was asking Colin if any of the absentees had indicated. Rachel, would you like to give a response to that for me?
Can you hear me, Claire, or?
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me, or? I can't. Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me, Elaine? Or?
I can.
You can, yeah. Hello? The answer is no, they can't because Brian's online. So
No,
They can't hear
so
us at all, though, can they?
I
No,
don't know whether it's something you could write something appropriate in the chat box for me.
Claire, Rachel just said no.
Okay, no, what? Sorry, no to what?
What else did you say, Rachel?
because you're online, you don't get voting rights, Brian. You need to be present.
Yeah,
Sorry,
because
they can't hear me for some reason.
No, I know. Because I'm
Okay.
online, Claire,
Okay.
I have no voting right.
Okay.
Right.
In which case, Rachel, am I right that there are insufficient members around the table currently to veto? Okay, thank you very much. In which case, then we need to support the precept. Does anybody particularly want to make a recommendation in terms of accepting?
Thank you, Chair. I would recommend we accept. We support the precept.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so members are happy to accept the precept without any additional recommendation. That then concludes the part of the meeting where Commissioner and your office staff and the Chief Constable are required. We thank you very much for your time and your effort and energy. Would you like to? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's not related to the precept, but it's you often ask if there's anything that the panel can support us on in terms of the sort of agenda. So the serious violence duty came into force, I think, beginning of last year, and it applies to all of the organisations represented at the table. Yesterday, the County-wide High Harms Board signed off the serious violence strategy, as well as the serious violence needs assessment. Now, what is quite apparent in there is that, essentially, the strategy addresses the causes and the factors that make serious violence more likely and less likely. So it's very much, upstream preventative as well as tackling actual serious violence as it occurs. But we had a discussion. Part of the challenge with this will be how this strategy impacts upon your organisations, not just in the sort of community safety element of them. So, and I just made a quick note down of some of the things as an example. And really, the officers that were at that meeting will need your support on how they get strategy into other forums within your organisations. Streetlights, as an example. So there was an element in the needs assessment that talked about young people being more concerned about going out when there's no street lights on. And this is all around likelihood to encourage them to sort of feel unsafe and therefore maybe need to protect themselves. It's that sort of context. Skills and employment, again, it's another factor. Employed people less likely to get into criminality. Youth services, particularly. Safe spaces was one of the things that the young people talked about. Absence from school and exclusions, increased factor. Adverse childhood experiences, of which there's a number of things. So some of these things are not going to be dealt with in your local community safety sort of committees and that sort of thing. So it's how you make sure, for instance, on the street lighting, whoever's making the decision on street lighting, I don't know what committee it would be in, but if it's a highways committee, they need to understand that there's an impact on the community safety agenda. So, as I say, I've encouraged officers to think about how that works. And so hence I thought I'd just sort of flag it to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. I'm sure that gives us all something to think about. I wonder if it's, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but maybe for the March meeting, would it be appropriate for you to just put a little bit of something in writing for us that actually maybe people could take away and think about the various panels and committees and things that they sit on, and maybe how we could help with that?
Yeah, I mean, we did discuss doing some sort of mapping work to try and work it out, but there's an element of time with this, and that might take a bit of time. But yes, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for all your hard work. Yes. We've only got one more. So, right. So we'll move to item 7, meeting dates and agenda plan. I haven't got them in front of me, which was a bit remiss, but we've got the dates at the back of the agenda pack for the next meeting in March. And I think we'd agreed previously that we would ask, thank you very much, Councillor Hogg. In relation to the March meeting, we would ask the Commissioner's Office to do an early review of the policing crime plan in order that we could do that with the Commissioner present prior to elections, rather than do that in July when potentially there may be a new Commissioner in office. So we'll ask for an early review of the police and crime plan ready for March, maybe just a few bullet points in terms of the matters that the Chief Exec has just raised. In terms of the meeting for the 14th of February, that will now not be required. So you can take that out of your diaries. And then at the March meeting, we'll have a think about the topics perhaps you would like to look at in July and September. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. It's a slightly strange concept, and I was wondering, could we just review how that budget meeting happens in future? And it's no criticism of anybody here. It's just, it would have been helpful to have on the agenda for today the format of the decision that we were taking, so that we knew what, because the purpose of us looking at the budget was to decide whether we wanted to veto it or not. But it didn't actually say that anywhere on the agenda. It was in your script, thank heavens, but it would have been helpful for us to be able to read that too. And I just wondered, can we just review whether that goes into a future budget meeting agenda? Thank you.
No problem. Okay, anybody have any final questions, comments, reflections, anything else? Thank you very much, Councillor Hogg. Okay, thank you very much for your time, effort and energy this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting is complete. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.
No problem. I don't think anyone could really hear us.